The warning beacon floated at the edge of human space, its message broadcasting in over 3,000 languages. Commander Krixtal of the Zalathi Empire read the translation on his ship's main screen for the 5th time. The words were simple, but they carried weight that had kept the galaxy at bay for over 200 years. This is the border of human territory. Any unauthorized entry will be considered an act of war. No exceptions, no negotiations. Turn back now. Krixtal's forearms tensed as he gripped the command chair. His scales, usually a calm blue, flickered with orange streaks of determination. The Zalathi were not a species that backed down from challenges. They had conquered a third of the known galaxy, subjugated dozens of species, and their military might was unmatched. Yet here they stood, at the edge of human space, hesitating like younglings afraid of the dark. "Commander, the fleet awaits your orders," his second-in-command, Vexara, said through her mandibles. Her compound eyes reflected the star field beyond, where 50 Zalathi warships hung in perfect formation. The bridge was silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Every officer knew the stories. Every species in the Galactic Council had heard them. The humans were different. They didn't expand like other species. They didn't trade, didn't negotiate, didn't participate in galactic politics. They simply existed behind their borders, silent and mysterious. But the stories that truly chilled every species were about those who had tried to enter human space. The Korvax expedition, 300 years ago, had sent 20 ships. None returned. The Etherian scouts, masters of stealth technology, vanished without a single distress signal. The mighty Draken Armada, with their planet-killer weapons, had approached human space with threats and demands. The only thing that came back was a single escape pod containing one survivor, who died babbling about the dark between stars before anyone could make sense of his words. "Sir, I must remind you of the Council's position," Vexara continued. "No species has successfully entered human space and returned with useful intelligence. The risk is why we're here," Krixtal interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of countless victories. "The Zalathi Empire has grown stagnant. We've conquered everything worth conquering. The other species bow to us or ally with us out of fear. But the humans?" He gestured toward the view screen. "They ignore us. They treat the greatest empire in the galaxy as if we don't exist." He stood up, his impressive height casting shadows across the bridge. "For 2 centuries, we've all cowered at their borders like prey animals. No more. The Zalathi will succeed where others have failed. We will enter human space, we will gather intelligence, and we will return to show the galaxy that humans are not gods. They're just another species hiding behind fear and reputation." The crew exchanged nervous glances. They were warriors, bred and trained for combat. But even they felt the weight of what their commander was proposing. The taboo against entering human space wasn't just political, it had become almost religious in nature. Species across the galaxy had developed myths about the humans, stories told to younglings about the guardians of the Forbidden Zone. "Prepare the stealth systems," Krixtal ordered. "We'll take a single ship first. The Shadow Claw will pierce their veil while the fleet waits here." "Commander," the navigation officer spoke up, his voice trembling slightly, "the spatial readings near the border are unusual. There are gravitational anomalies that don't match any known phenomena." "The humans are clever," Krixtal acknowledged. "They've probably set up some kind of detection grid or defensive system, but we have the finest technology in the galaxy. Whatever tricks they have, we'll overcome them." As the crew prepared for the historic breach, Krixtal studied the star charts. Human space was an enigma wrapped in impossibility. By all astronomical surveys, it should contain at least 40 habitable systems, resource-rich planets, and strategic positions that any expanding civilization would covet. Yet the humans had claimed it all, and then stopped. They didn't push further. They didn't demand tribute from neighboring systems. They simply drew their line and dared anyone to cross it. The mystery had gnawed at military strategists and xenobiologists for generations. What kind of species possessed the power to enforce such absolute borders but chose isolation over expansion? The few human ships that had been spotted outside their territory were traders, keeping to specific routes and predetermined stops. They were polite, efficient, and revealed nothing about their home systems. Attempts to follow them back always ended at the border, where they seemed to simply vanish. "All systems ready, Commander," Vexara reported. "Stealth mode engaged. Weapons charged but signatures masked. If we encounter resistance, we won't," Krixtal said with confidence he didn't entirely feel. "We're not here to fight. We're here to observe, to learn. The Zalathi Empire needs to understand what lies beyond that border if we're ever to truly claim dominance over this galaxy." He settled back into his command chair as the Shadow Claw began to move. The massive warship, pride of the Zalathi fleet, slid through space like its namesake, silent and deadly. Around them, the stars seemed to shift and blur as they approached the invisible line that had stopped countless others. "Crossing the border in 10 seconds, the navigation officer announced. The entire bridge held its breath. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, mark. Nothing happened. For a moment, Krixtal felt a surge of triumph. They had done it. They had crossed into human space and, "Commander, something's wrong with the stars," the sensor operator said, confusion in her voice. They're not where they should be." Krixtal looked at the view screen and felt his scales turn pale. The stars were indeed wrong. Constellations that should have been familiar were twisted, distorted. Space itself seemed to ripple around them like water disturbed by an unseen hand. "Navigation, report!" I can't get a fix, sir. It's as if space itself is fluid here. Every reading contradicts the last. We're moving, but I can't tell in which direction." The lights on the bridge flickered. For just a moment, Krixtal could have sworn he saw something move in the shadows between the consoles. Something that shouldn't have been there. "Commander!" Vexara's voice was tight with controlled fear. "We're receiving a transmission." On screen, the view screen filled with static, then cleared to show nothing, just darkness. But it was a darkness that seemed alive, that seemed to watch them. "Welcome to human space." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't threatening, it wasn't angry, it was simply inevitable. "You were warned. This is Commander Krixtal of the Zalathi Empire," he began, trying to keep authority in his voice. "We come in peace, seeking dialogue." "No," the voice interrupted. "You come in arrogance, seeking conquest, like all the others before you. You believe your strength, your technology, your empire makes you special. It doesn't." The bridge suddenly felt colder. Several crew members shivered despite their environmental suits maintaining perfect temperature. "We are explorers," Krixtal tried again. "If you would simply—" "We know what you are," the voice said. "We know what every species is. We've watched you all grow, expand, conquer, destroy. We've seen your wars, your cruelties, your limitless appetite for more, and we decided long ago that we wanted no part of it." The stars outside continued their impossible dance. One of the junior officers pointed at the view screen with a trembling hand. "Commander, look at the stars. Really look at them." Krixtal focused on the twisted constellations and felt his heart stop. They weren't random. The stars were forming patterns, symbols perhaps, or maybe words in a language too alien for his mind to process. But somehow, he understood their meaning on a primal level. They spoke of age beyond measure, of patience beyond comprehension, and of power that made the Zalathi Empire look like insects scratching in the dirt. "You wonder why we don't expand?" the voice continued, almost conversationally. Why we don't conquer as you do? The answer is simple. We don't need to. We have everything we require within our borders. More importantly, we've evolved beyond the need to prove our superiority by subjugating others. Then why the isolation? Krixtal asked, genuinely curious despite his fear. Why not share your knowledge, your technology? A sound that might have been laughter echoed through the ship. Share? With species that still measure success by how many others they can force to kneel? You're not ready. None of you are ready. The sensor operator suddenly screamed. On her console, readings were showing impossible things. The Shadow Claw was simultaneously in multiple locations. It was moving at speeds that violated physics. It was older than it should be, younger than it could be. Time itself seemed to have become negotiable. What are you doing to my ship? Krixtal demanded. Nothing, the voice replied. You're doing it to yourselves. Your minds can't process what you're experiencing, so they're creating interpretations, filters, shadows of reality that you can understand. But the human space doesn't conform to your understanding of physics. We've made sure of that. Vexara was frantically working at her console. Commander, I'm trying to send a signal to the fleet, but I can't find them. It's as if they never existed. They exist, the voice assured them. They're exactly where you left them. But where did you leave them? When did you leave them? Are you sure you ever had a fleet at all? The questions burrowed into Krixtal's mind like parasites. He found himself doubting memories he'd held for decades. Had he really commanded a fleet? Was he really a Zalathi? The certainties of his life began to crumble. Stop this, he roared. Face us directly. Show yourselves. We are showing ourselves, the voice said sadly. This is what humanity has become. We found the truth that your species run from, that the universe is not what it seems, that reality is not the solid thing you believe it to be. We embraced that truth. We evolved with it. And in doing so, we became something your minds literally cannot perceive without breaking. The bridge was chaos now. Officers reported readings that made no sense. The ship's AI was speaking in languages that had never existed. The walls seemed to breathe, and in the corners of vision, shapes moved that had too many dimensions or not enough. Please, Krixtal said, abandoning all pretense of strength. Let us go. We'll leave. We'll never return. Leave? The voice sounded genuinely puzzled. But you just arrived. Or have you been here for centuries? Time is such a flexible concept once you understand its true nature. The commander looked at his hands and couldn't remember how many fingers he was supposed to have. The scales on his arms formed patterns that hurt to perceive, fractals within fractals that suggested infinite depth. The others who entered our space, he managed to ask. What happened to them? They discovered what you're discovering. That consciousness itself is the greatest prison. You believe you're individuals, separate from the universe around you. You believe in the illusion of linear time, of cause and effect, of discrete existence. Those who entered our space had those illusions stripped away. Most couldn't handle the truth. And those who could? Look around you, Commander. Who do you think is speaking to you? The implication hit Krixtal like a physical blow. The disappeared expeditions? They're still here? They became like you? Not like us. They became us. We are humanity, but we are also Korvax, Etherian, Dracon, and a dozen other species who sought to conquer the unconquerable. In the end, they all chose ascension over annihilation. The question now is, what will you choose? The Shadow Claw shuddered, though there was no external force acting upon it. Or perhaps there were 1,000,000 forces, all existing simultaneously. Krixtal could no longer tell. His crew was fracturing, some screaming about visions of impossible geometries, others sitting in perfect stillness as their minds touched something beyond comprehension. "I choose survival," Crixtall said firmly. "For my crew, for my species. Tell us what we must do." "Forget," the voice said simply. "Forget you ever came here. Forget what you've seen. Return to your empire and speak of failure. A simple equipment malfunction that forced you to turn back. Let the legend of human space grow. Let the fear keep others away. Because the alternative is this: joining us in a existence your current form cannot truly comprehend. And if we refuse to forget, then you'll remember, and in remembering, you'll never truly leave. Part of you will always be here, in the spaces between spaces, in the moments between moments. Eventually, that part will call the rest of you home." Crixatal closed his eyes. How many did he have now? And made his choice. "Send us back. We'll forget. We'll lie. We'll protect others from this truth." "Wise choice, Commander. But know this: we don't hide because we fear you. We hide because we pity you. Your children playing with toys you call weapons, building sand castles you call empires. One day perhaps you'll be ready to see reality as it truly is. Until then," the universe twisted. Colors that had no names blazed across the bridge. The crew screamed in harmonies that suggested mathematical truths too complex for sound. And then, they were back. Floating at the edge of human space, the warning beacon still broadcasting its simple message. The fleet surrounded them, exactly where they'd left it. Or had they ever left at all? "Commander?" Vexera looked confused. "You ordered us to cross, but then, did we? I can't seem to remember." Crixtall looked at his hands. 4 arms, the right number. His scales were the proper shade of blue. Everything was normal. Everything was as it should be. Except, in the corner of his vision sometimes, he could see the stars dancing, forming patterns that whispered truths he desperately didn't want to understand. "Equipment malfunction," he heard himself say. "We'll need to return to base for repairs. Signal the fleet. We're leaving." "But sir, the mission is over." He turned to face his second-in-command, and for just a moment he thought he saw too many eyes in her face. "Human space remains a mystery, and perhaps that's for the best." As the Zalathi fleet turned away from the border, Crixtall allowed himself one last look at the Forbidden Zone. Somewhere in that darkness, beings that had once been like him existed in states of consciousness he could barely imagine. They had transcended the need for conquest, for expansion, for the petty games that defined galactic civilization. And they waited. Patient, eternal, incomprehensible. The warning beacon continued its broadcast, but Crixtall now understood it wasn't a threat. It was a mercy. The humans weren't keeping others out to protect themselves. They were keeping others out to protect them from the truth of what lay beyond. 3 months had passed since the Shadow Claw's failed mission, and the Galactic Council was in an uproar. Ambassador Thrix of the Melody floated in the center of the great chamber, her crystalline form catching and refracting the light from 1,000 different worlds. Around her, representatives from every major species in the galaxy waited for the Zalathi explanation. "The mighty Zalathi Empire," Thrix's voice chimed like breaking glass, "assembled the largest fleet seen in 50 years, approached human space, and then turned around? You expect us to believe this was due to equipment malfunction?" High Admiral Krexvara, sister to the missing Commander Crixtall, stood rigid at the defendant's podium. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times, but the words still felt like ash in her mouth. "The technical reports are available for review. Multiple system failures across the flagship made continuation impossible." "How convenient," buzzed Ambassador Zek of the Hive Collective. The Zelathi, who have never experienced such failures in their entire military history, suddenly developed them at the edge of human space. The chamber filled with murmurs, clicks, and various other sounds of skepticism. Every species present had their own theories about human space, but they all shared one common belief. The Zelathi were hiding something. In the shadows of the upper gallery, a figure watched the proceedings with interest. Dr. Chen Wei was one of the few humans who ventured outside their borders, a cultural observer tasked with monitoring galactic civilization. She appeared perfectly normal, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head with features that wouldn't seem out of place on any of a dozen humanoid species. But appearances, as the galaxy was slowly learning, could be deceiving. "What of Commander Krixtall?" asked the Etherian representative, their gaseous forms swirling with agitation. "Why is he not here to defend his actions?" "The commander is indisposed," Krexavara replied carefully. It wasn't exactly a lie. Her brother was alive, technically. He sat in his quarters on the Zelathi homeworld, staring at star charts and mumbling about patterns. Sometimes he would suddenly start writing equations that made no sense, covering walls with formulas that hurt to look at. The medical staff said he was suffering from a unique form of trauma, but they couldn't explain why proximity to him caused headaches and nightmares. "I've heard rumors," the Korvax ambassador interjected, his mechanical voice carrying across the chamber. "Zelathi military hospitals report a spike in psychological cases, officers from the fleet that approached human space suffering from shared delusions. They speak of stars that move, of time that bends, of voices that come from nowhere." "Stress-induced paranoia," Krexvara said quickly. Too quickly. "The pressure of being the first to attempt," she caught herself. "That is, the pressure of the mission was intense." "So you admit it wasn't just equipment failure?" Thrix pounced on the slip. "You did attempt to enter human space?" The chamber went silent. Even species that communicated through chemical emissions seemed to hold their breath. This was the confirmation they'd all been waiting for. Krexvara's scales shifted through a spectrum of colors: fear, anger, resignation. "Yes," she finally admitted. "One ship crossed the border. It returned, changed." "Changed how?" multiple voices asked simultaneously. "I don't know." The admission burst from her like a dam breaking. "My brother won't speak coherently about it. The crew members either remember nothing or remember too much. Those who remember too much they're not well. They draw things, speak in languages that don't exist, claim to see connections between events that have no connection." One of them spent 3 days arranging food pellets in a pattern she said would explain everything, but looking at it just gave everyone vertigo. Dr. Chen Wei smiled sadly from her hidden vantage point. The Zelathi were handling it better than most. The Drakon had tried to weaponize what they'd learned, creating a bomb that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. It had worked, in a sense. The test facility was still there and not there, a scar in reality that would take centuries to heal. The Etherians who'd returned had simply dispersed, their gaseous forms spreading thinner and thinner until they merged with the cosmic background radiation, whispering secrets in static. "This is precisely why the quarantine must be maintained," declared the ancient Vorthan elder, speaking for the first time in decades. "Human space is an anomaly, a cancer in the fabric of reality. We should reinforce the borders, add our own warnings to theirs." "Or," suggested Ambassador Zek, "we could unite, all of us. Every fleet, every weapon, every resource. Surely humanity cannot stand against the combined might of the entire galaxy." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Several species representatives leaned forward, interest gleaming in various sensory organs. The Zelathi might have failed alone, but together. That would be unwise. Every being in the chamber turned toward the new voice. Dr. Chen Wei stepped from the shadows, her appearance causing a ripple of shock through the assembly. A human. Here. How had she gotten past security? How long had she been listening? Dr. Chen Wei, she introduced herself calmly, as if appearing from nowhere in the most secure facility in the galaxy was perfectly normal. Cultural attaché from the human collective. I believe I can offer some clarification. You dare, began the Zalathi admiral, but Chen raised a hand, and somehow, impossibly, the gesture carried enough weight to silence a being who commanded fleets. We monitor your discussions about us, Chen said simply. We always have. Did you think your secure channels were truly secure from beings who have transcended conventional space-time? We allow you your illusions of privacy because it serves both our purposes. Then why reveal yourself now? Thrix asked, her crystalline form vibrating with a frequency that indicated extreme stress. Because you're considering something catastrophic. A united assault on human space wouldn't result in victory. It would result in the end of galactic civilization as you know it. Chen moved to the center of the chamber, and as she did, subtle wrongness followed her. Shadows fell at incorrect angles. The air seemed to ripple in her wake. We maintain our borders not out of fear or xenophobia, but out of compassion. Compassion, scoffed the Dracon representative. You hide behind walls and let others wonder and fear. How is that compassionate? Chen smiled, and for just a moment her teeth seemed to reflect stars that weren't visible from inside the chamber. Let me tell you a story. 300 years ago, humanity was like you. We reached for the stars with ships of metal and hearts full of dreams. We sought new worlds to colonize, new species to meet, new wonders to discover. She paused, and in that pause, several representatives could have sworn they heard distant singing in languages that predated speech. Then we found something, or perhaps it found us, a truth about the nature of reality that your science hasn't even begun to suspect. We fought it at first, tried to contain it, to study it safely. But truth, real truth, cannot be contained. It spreads. It changes those who encounter it. So you were infected? The Vorthon elder asked. This anomaly you found, it corrupted your species? Not corrupted, evolved. Imagine you're a two-dimensional being living on a flat surface. Your entire existence, your whole understanding of reality, is limited to length and width. Then suddenly, you discover height. You realize there's an entire dimension you never knew existed. Now imagine that revelation multiplied by infinity. The chamber's atmosphere grew heavy. Several representatives found themselves struggling to breathe despite adequate life support. At first, only a few of us could perceive the true nature of things. They tried to explain, to share what they'd learned, but how do you describe color to those who've never had eyes? How do you explain music to those who've never had ears? The attempt to communicate drove listeners mad and transformed speakers into something beyond baseline humanity. So you isolated yourselves, Krexvara said slowly. To protect us? To protect both of us. Those who weren't ready for the truth either died or became something else. We realized that forced evolution is just another form of genocide. So we withdrew. We set our borders and stationed guards, not to keep you out, but to give you the choice. Enter and face transcendence or destruction. Stay away and remain as you are. But the disappeared expeditions chose transcendence. Your brother Admiral stands at a crossroads. Part of him touched the truth. Part of him pulled back. He exists between states now, neither fully in your reality nor ours. In time, he'll have to choose. Most do, eventually. Ambassador Zek's compound eyes glittered with a mixture of fear and fascination. You speak as if you're still human, but you're not, are you? Not anymore. Chen's form flickered just for an instant. And in that flicker, the assembly saw something that their minds immediately rejected. Too many dimensions. Too much information. A being that existed across multiple states of reality simultaneously. I'm as human as I choose to be in this moment, Chen replied. Just as you're as real as you believe yourselves to be. But that's a philosophical discussion your species won't be ready for another 1,000 years. So we're supposed to just accept this? The Melody Ambassador's chimes were discordant now. Live in fear of the unknown? Never know what lies beyond your borders? Fear? No. Respect? Yes. Your species are on their own journeys of evolution. In time, centuries, millennia perhaps, you'll discover what we discovered. But it will be at your pace, in your way. The universe is vast and patient. There's no rush. And if we don't accept this? The Drakon representative's threat was clear. If we unite against you anyway? Chen's expression grew sad. Then you'll learn what Commander Krixtal learned, that your weapons, your ships, your armies, they're all based on a limited understanding of physics. We've moved beyond such limitations. 1 billion ships or one, it makes no difference when you can simply convince space that they were never there to begin with. You're saying you could destroy us all? I'm saying we could make it so you never existed in the first place. Past, present, future, these are constructs you cling to. We've learned to edit reality like you edit documents. But we won't. Because despite what you might think, we still value life. All life. Even life that doesn't yet understand what life truly is. The weight of her words settled over the chamber like a shroud. Each representative grappled with the implications. They weren't dealing with a more advanced civilization. They were dealing with beings who had fundamentally transcended the very nature of existence. However, Chen continued, her tone brightening slightly, isolation doesn't mean complete separation. We do trade, as you know. We share certain technologies, carefully selected ones that won't cause harm. We observe and occasionally intervene when species face extinction-level threats. We're not gods, despite what your mythologies are starting to suggest. We're simply further along the path. What path? Thrix asked quietly. The path to understanding that consciousness isn't something that exists within the universe. The universe is something that exists within consciousness. But that's a lesson each species must learn for themselves. She began to move back toward the shadows she'd emerged from. Continue your debates, make your laws, build your empires. We'll be here waiting, whenever you're ready to take the next step. Some of you will be ready sooner than others. Some may never be ready, and that's acceptable too. Infinity has room for all possibilities. Wait, Krexavara called out. My brother, will he recover? Chen paused. That depends on what you mean by recover. He'll never be who he was before, but he might become something better, or something worse. The choice, as always, is his. Can you help him? I could, but helping would mean bringing him fully into our reality. He would cease to be Zalathi. He would cease to be your brother in any way you could recognize. Is that what you want? The Admiral's silence was answer enough. I thought not. Let him find his own way. The mind has remarkable abilities to adapt, to create buffers between what it knows and what it can handle. In time, he might find a balance, or he might take the final step. Either way, he's touched something greater than himself. That's more than most beings ever achieve. As Chen faded back into the shadows, and it was a true fading, as if she was becoming less real rather than simply moving, she left them with one final thought. You call it human space, but it hasn't been exclusively human for a long time. Every species that's entered and transformed has added their uniqueness to our collective. We are humanity, but we are also all those who chose to see beyond the veil. Perhaps one day we'll simply be us, all of us, united not by conquest, but by understanding. And then she was gone, leaving only questions and the lingering sensation that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than any of them had dared imagine. The debate continued for hours afterward, but the tone had changed. Where once there had been talk of conquest and investigation, now there was caution and introspection. Each species would return to their worlds with new thoughts, new dreams, and new nightmares. In his quarters on the Zalathi homeworld, Commander Krixtal suddenly stopped drawing his incomprehensible equations. For the first time in months, his eyes focused clearly. He looked at the patterns covering his walls, patterns that mapped connections between stars, between thoughts, between possibilities, and smiled. "Not yet," he whispered to voices only he could hear. "But someday, when they're ready, when we're all ready." He returned to his equations, adding new variables that accounted for patience, for growth, for the slow evolution of consciousness across a galaxy that didn't yet know it was dreaming. The human space remained inviolate, its borders untested, but now the galaxy understood it wasn't a prison keeping humanity in. It was a chrysalis, waiting for the rest of them to develop wings. 500 years had passed since the Zalathi incident, and the galaxy had changed. The warning beacons around human space still broadcast their message, but now they were treated less as threats and more as sacred monuments. Entire religions had sprung up around the mystery of humanity, and pilgrims from countless worlds would journey to the borders just to meditate in the presence of the unknown. On a small research station orbiting a neutron star, Dr. Wilara of the Quentin Collective made final adjustments to her equipment. The Quentin were a young species by galactic standards, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 3 centuries ago. But what they lacked in age, they made up for in curiosity and innovation. "Are you certain about this?" her assistant, Borak, asked for the 100th time. His feathers ruffled nervously as he watched her work. "The Galactic Council has forbidden all attempts to study human space phenomena. The Council fears what it doesn't understand," Ilara replied, her 4 eyes focused intently on the quantum resonance scanner she'd spent decades perfecting. "But fear has never advanced science. Besides, I'm not trying to enter human space. I'm simply listening." It had taken her 50 years to develop the theory, and another 30 to build the device. The concept was elegantly simple. If human space operated on different physical laws, then those differences should create detectable ripples where their reality intersected with standard space-time, like hearing an echo from another dimension. "Initiating scan," she announced, activating the machine. At first, nothing happened. The displays showed normal background radiation, typical gravitational waves, standard quantum fluctuations. Then, slowly, patterns began to emerge, not in any single measurement, but in the spaces between measurements, in the gaps where certainty became probability. "By the ancient eggs," Borak whispered. "What is that?" The patterns were beautiful and terrible. They suggested mathematical relationships that shouldn't exist, harmonics that played in dimensions the Quentin had no names for. As Ilara watched, she began to understand why those who entered human space either vanished or returned mad. The universe wasn't what they thought it was. It was so much more. "It's like..." She struggled for words. "Imagine reality as a song, and we've only been hearing one note. But there's an entire symphony playing, has always been playing, and we've been deaf to it." "Should we stop?" Borak's voice was tight with fear. "No, this is what we were meant to find. This is why our species evolved consciousness, to one day perceive the true nature of..." She froze. On the display, something impossible was happening. The patterns were responding to her observations, shifting and adapting as if aware of being watched. And then, between one heartbeat and the next, words appeared. Not on the screen, but in her mind, in concepts her language had no way to express but which she understood perfectly. "You're ready." The research station's alarms suddenly blared. A ship had appeared, not arrived, not dropped out of hyperspace, simply existed where nothing had existed a moment before. It was small, elegant, and wrong in every way that mattered. Looking at it was like trying to focus on something that existed in more dimensions than eyes were designed to see. "Dr. Ilara of the Quentin Collective," a voice spoke through their communications system. It sounded human, but underneath the words were harmonics that suggested vast spaces and infinite time. "I am Captain Sarah Chen, great-great-granddaughter of Dr. Chenwei. We've been waiting for someone like you." "Someone like me?" Ilara's voice trembled, though whether from fear or excitement she couldn't tell. "Someone who would seek understanding rather than conquest. Someone who would listen rather than demand. Your species is young, but you show promise. Would you like to see what lies beyond the veil?" Borak grabbed Ilara's arm. "Don't. Think of what happened to the others. The Zalathi commander, the Dracon experiments. All tried to force their way in," Captain Chen's voice interrupted, though their communications system was supposedly encrypted. "They came with weapons and demands, with assumptions and arrogance. You came with questions and wonder. That makes all the difference." An airlock that hadn't existed moments before appeared in the station's hull. Through it, Ilara could see a corridor that seemed to extend both forever and no distance at all. At its end stood a figure that was probably human, though the word seemed inadequate. Sarah Chen existed in a state of controlled multiplicity, simultaneously one person and many, present and absent, human and something far more. "If I go with you," Ilara asked, "will I ever return?" "That depends on how you define return. You'll come back to this station, you'll complete your research, you'll report to your people, but you'll never be the same. How could you be after seeing the truth?" "And what is the truth?" Sarah smiled, and in that smile were galaxies being born and dying, civilizations rising and falling, the dance of atoms and the song of quasars. That's what you'll have to discover for yourself. We can show you the door, but you must choose to walk through it. Ilara looked at her assistant, her friend of 40 years. "Log everything. Whatever happens, make sure our people know that humanity isn't our enemy. They're our future, if we're brave enough to face it." She stepped through the airlock. The sensation was indescribable. It wasn't movement. It was transformation. Every atom in her body suddenly remembered that it had once been part of a star. Every thought in her mind realized it was connected to every other thought that had ever existed. She was Ilara, but she was also the cosmic dust that had formed her world, the light that had traveled billions of years to reach her eyes, the quantum possibility that had collapsed into her existence. "Welcome to true space," Sarah said. Though speaking seemed redundant when thoughts flowed between them like water. "What you call human space is simply where we've learned to perceive reality as it actually is, rather than as evolution programmed us to see it." They stood, though standing implied a fixed location, and locations were more suggestions here, in a place that wasn't a place. Stars wheeled overhead, but they were also underfoot and within. Time flowed in all directions simultaneously. Ilara could see her own past and future spreading out like branches of an infinite tree. "This is impossible," she breathed. "No," Sarah corrected gently. "Your previous understanding was impossible. A limited approximation that worked well enough for survival but fell apart at the edges. This is simply what is." Other figures materialized around them, or perhaps they had always been there, and Ilara was just now able to perceive them. Humans, yes, but also Korvax with their crystalline bodies now reflecting infinite facets of reality. Dracon whose scales rippled with colors that existed beyond the visible spectrum. even some Zalathi, including one whose patterns of thought felt familiar. "Commander Crixtal?" Ilara gasped. The being that had once been the Zalathi commander smiled with too many dimensions. "I finally chose. It took me decades to let go of my fear, but when I did," he gestured at the impossible vista around them. "How can anyone go back to the cave after seeing the sun? But your sister, your people, still exist, still matter. I visit them sometimes wearing a form they can recognize. But I'm also here, and in 1,000 other places experiencing existence in ways our languages have no words for." He paused. "Will you stay?" It was the question she'd known was coming. Looking around, Ilara could feel the temptation to shed the limitations of linear thinking, of singular existence, of cause and effect, to become part of something vast and beautiful and terrible. "Not yet," she said finally. "My people need to know. They need to prepare." Sarah nodded approvingly. Wisdom. Too much too fast breaks minds and species. But you can be a bridge. Return to them with what you've learned. Help them grow. When they're ready, truly ready, we'll be here. "How will I explain this?" Ilara gestured at the indescribable reality around her. "How can I make them understand?" You can't. Not fully. But you can plant seeds. Share your recordings, your data. Some will dismiss it as hallucination, others will fear it, but a few, always a few, will be curious. They'll build on your work, ask new questions, develop new ways of thinking. Generation by generation, thought by thought, your species will evolve. And those who aren't ready will remain as they are. The universe is vast enough for all forms of consciousness. Not everyone needs to transcend. Diversity of thought, of being, of understanding, that's what makes existence beautiful. Sarah gestured, and the impossible space began to fold. Ilara felt herself being gently pushed back toward her limited dimensional existence. It was like trying to compress an ocean into a cup, but somehow it worked. Her consciousness contracted, simplified, until she could again think in terms of before and after, here and there. "One last question," Ilara said as the airlock reformed around her. "Why humanity? Why were you the first to find this truth?" Sarah's expression was complex. Joy and sorrow, pride and humility all at once. "We weren't the first. We were just the first in this corner of the galaxy. Somewhere else, other species have made the same discovery. And somewhere else beyond that, beings we can't even imagine have transcended in ways that make our evolution look primitive. It's an infinite universe, Ilara. There's always another level, always another truth, always another transformation waiting." And then she was back in the research station. Borak was staring at her with all four eyes wide, his feathers completely puffed out in shock. "You were gone for 3 seconds, he whispered. "But the chronometer says..." "Time isn't what we thought it was," Ilara said calmly. She looked at her equipment, seeing the data it had recorded. To most, it would look like garbage, impossible readings that violated every known law of physics. But to someone who had seen the truth, it was a roadmap. "What do we do now?" Borak asked. "We publish, we share, we prepare our people for the future." She turned to look through the viewport at the distant border of human space. "They're waiting for us, Borak. Not as conquerors or gods, but as fellow travelers who've simply walked a bit further down the path. And someday, when we're ready, we'll join them. And if we're never ready?" Ilara smiled, remembering the infinite patience she'd felt from the transcended beings. "Then we'll live our lives as we always have, and that will be enough." But I don't think that's our destiny. I think every species that develops consciousness eventually faces this choice. Some turn away, some are destroyed by it, but some spread their wings and fly. She began organizing her data, preparing for the storm of controversy that would follow her publication. The Galactic Council would condemn her. Conservative scientists would mock her. But somewhere, on some world, a young mind would read her work and wonder. And that wonder would lead to questions, and questions to discoveries, and discoveries to transformation. The warning beacons continued their eternal broadcast, but Ilara now understood they weren't really warnings at all. They were invitations, waiting for someone brave enough to RSVP. In human space, Sarah Chen returned to her existence beyond existence. She shared Ilara's choice with the collective consciousness that was humanity and more than humanity. Joy rippled through dimensions at the news. Another species had taken the first step. Another voice would eventually join their infinite chorus. "How many more will come?" asked a consciousness that had once been a Draken warrior. "All of them eventually," replied a thought form that remembered being human. "Or none of them. Time will tell." Time, laughed another facet of their collective being, is such a limited concept. They turned their attention back to the galaxy, to the billions of minds slowly growing, thinking, questioning, each species on its own journey, each consciousness a unique note in the symphony of existence. They would wait, as they had always waited, with infinite patience and boundless hope. Because they remembered being small. They remembered being afraid. They remembered believing the universe was cold and empty and meaningless. Now they knew better. The universe was warm with consciousness, full of infinite possibility, and meaning was everywhere for those who learned to see it. The stars danced their ancient dance, and in the spaces between, humanity and its transcended allies continued their vigil. Not as guards or judges, but as lighthouses in the cosmic dark, waiting to guide others home to a truth as beautiful as it was terrifying. Reality was so much more than anyone dared imagine, and the journey to discover it had only just begun.